We're live at the third annual CISO Ensemble, and we are discussing developing enhanced security architecture skills for the leader of tomorrow. We are having our fantastic panel moderated by Mike Manrod, CISO for GCE. On our panel, we have Khellan Payne, Trust and Security Architect at GitHub, Jim Rutt, CISO at Dana, Dick Wilkinson, CTO at Proof Labs, Steve Allison, Field CISO at CDW, and we might have one other rejoining us very shortly. Mike, what are you going to be talking about for this session?
Yeah, so we have an exciting topic, and it was great in a lot of our pre-discussions because this topic had like a lot of different points and controversial views and a lot on both sides of the topic. So I'm excited about it. But we'll be talking about, does the CISO role require architecture skills? Like, do you have to be an architect at heart to be a CISO? Yes, no. Does it depend? And, I think we're going to have a lively discussion about this. So I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. Well, you have the floor. I'll be in the background.
Sweet. As you alluded to at the intro, we have a good sized panel here. So we're going to do this very conversationally. I figured the last thing I wanted to do is show up with 20 questions. And really the fundamental question is, how is the CISO role evolving? And is it getting more technical, less technical, or does it depend? And again, with us today, we have Khellan, Steve, Dick, and Jim. Jim, why don't you kick us off with this one?
Sure. I think this was a great pre-talk, as you described before, Mike. And again, I'm kind of colored by my experience coming up through the ranks. As I started in data, actually, and then became the CIO, and then grafted on security experience along the way, probably about 15 or so years ago, en route to my present situation where I'm both CIO and CISO. So I'm weighted in one direction more, probably more than some other folks that may have ascended to the CISO role from, say, a different background, right? So in my mind, as a CIO, CISO, chief technology practitioner, whether it be cyber or otherwise, I think it's absolutely critical that you have a better than average understanding of not only architecture standards, but principles as well in general, because you need to be able to be conversant in all the different technical controls that you're going to be dealing with. Obviously, there are different controls or human controls, et cetera, that may not require an architecture background. But just as I'm required to have a modicum of understanding from the legal, regulatory, governance, provenance areas which I did not have a strong background, fiduciary and otherwise, I think it's incumbent that the security leader must be fairly well rooted in these areas in order to not only understand what he's got from a control perspective and be able to strategize accordingly, but also to gain credibility within his own organization, because that's going to be the foundation of the success moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, you make a strong case, Jim. Yeah, Steve, what do you think? What do you think on the topic?
So I have kind of mixed feelings about it. I grew up through the architecture world. So I've been in security for 30 years and then worked my way up through CISO. And so to me, that was a natural path. However, as I mentioned in our pre-call, one of the best leaders I've seen as a CISO, he did not grow up that path. He was actually an executive vice president of a company that when I was with DHL that we had acquired, and he became the CISO for the Deutsche Post, who owned, DHL at the time. He really had no security knowledge at the time. He did his best to catch up to it, but what he did is he trusted the people beneath him. So he was a business leader, and he was a very he was a very good business leader. When it came to speaking with the board, when it came to getting money, he knew how to get that done, which somebody who grows up through the architecture world doesn't necessarily have those skills inherently, as you're growing up that way. You're still talking the technical speak, and he was trusting his individual people beneath him. So On larger organizations, I think that can happen. On smaller organizations that I deal with a lot, fall into the realm of where Jim is, where there's a CIO who's actually having to act as the CISO as well, or the director of security, the director of IT is the director of security. And at that point, if you have the good staff beneath you, it comes to the difference between if you're a macro manager and you allow ownership of different fields to be run by your teams beneath you, or if you're a micromanager. If you're a micromanager, you have to have the architecture skills to be able to check up on your team. If you're a macro manager, so I'm a macro manager. My team, I had an intelligence organization, I had a vulnerability management group, a threat management group, and then risk management, right? And then investigations and forensics. And I had a guy that controlled each one of those. And if I was a micromanager, I would have gotten back probably 10% of the work that I got from my teams by giving them full ownership. So at that point, it allowed me to be more business minded and more of a crap screen from anything above from hitting my team below. And that worked out very well for me. So I think it can go either way, but it depends on the organization and it depends on the teams that you have beneath you. I do think they need to have a level of cybersecurity understanding at kind of a CISSP level, where it's going to be broad general knowledge so they understand what their teams are telling them, so they can actually relay that and be the translator to the board.
I think those are really insightful thoughts, Steve. I mean, it really, just like the CISO role in general, I mean, it seems like it varies a lot based upon size, scale,
absolutely,
specific org, and what the needs are. I definitely, when I look at my experience, I've had roles where maybe I've got a title here, but I'm still having to be hands on the keyboard and do stuff because there aren't enough people. And then I have friends at orgs that are huge. They just simply, it wouldn't make sense for them to be in the weeds of every topic because their security org is massive. So I imagine there's a bunch of shades in between.
And I've met CISOs in the past that are proud of the fact that they can log in and check the firewalls and all of this. And I've talked about, like, why are you doing that? That is not your job. You need to let your teams do their job. Why are you bothering to log in and check up on your teams? If you don't trust your teams that much, get a new team.
Right. Yeah, no, that's the great insights.
Can I jump in there for a second? I would agree with you, Steve, but I would at least, as a CISO, if not down to that level, but understand, say, the general trends around firewalls and zero trust and how they all interlock.
Absolutely.
Architecturally, that's a requirement, no matter from what size organization or background that you've come from.
Yeah, you need to understand the compliance levels.
That's a really good point, Jim, too, because in a larger org, an architect probably shouldn't be signing into the firewalls to check on detailed configs too much either, right? They're very strategic in nature too. But Khellan, let's give you a shot at this. What do you think?
Oh dear. So I think it's very context related. I do have a bit of a hesitation if at the point where I am running the organization as a CISO, a CSO, and I have the time, the energy, the narrow-mindedness to spend cycles focusing on verifying a firewall is doing what it's supposed to be doing, I'm pretty much failing at my job. Okay, and that's one of the biggest challenges. It's not that I shouldn't be able to understand the readout, but I should never be put in front of a keyboard. In fact, I should never have authentication to get there, period, okay? Because if I'm doing my job well as a CISO, it's providing that level of leadership, of strategy, of making sure my teams have bite-sized chunks to manage and work with. And it's exactly the same in architecture as far as I'm concerned. Part of my job will be influence. Because getting the right people to sign off on the right budgets, to understand that this is step 1 of 25 and you may never see the end of it, but at the end of it, you can see how the organization is getting to a better place. And not just security wise, because if it's just a security thing, we're out of a job, but operationally, whether it's availability, all of the things that we're supposed to do to enable the strategic, the vision, the ambition of the company. So I understand being able to know what zero architecture means to a deep down level. I am challenged when who am I speaking this to? And one of my primary roles as an architect is to talk straightforward business, translate the tech to straightforward business, whether it be risk, whether it be the IT stack or whatever, to the right people, and to take down the directives and translate those to actual things that my teams underneath or the people I'm working with can actually pick up and work with. So yeah, I'm on the fence when somebody says I need to have that deep understanding. It doesn't fit in the strategy. Okay, zero trust is a concept, or it doesn't matter, SASE or whatever these words, right? It's only applicable if I'm dealing with, I guess, application vendors who want to speak those words. Sorry, I think I've yeah.
So it sounds like you know the strategic half of the role you see aligning well with the necessities of the CISO, but it sounds like you're drawing a real clear line in the sand that you don't think the CISO should be an admin or an engineer. Right. Which, and again, I think the confusion of should a CISO be an architect is built on the foundation of the confusion of what does an architect do, which I know is a lot of the rest of the conversations today, right? Because I've met architects that are very in the weeds, and I've met architects that haven't signed into a system in 5 years, but have tremendous knowledge, and both can be valid and depending. All right, Dick, let's let you weigh in on this. You get to go last, but that also means you have the last word till the next question, unless somebody chimes in.
Then I'll say a bunch of sensational stuff, or maybe controversial stuff. How's that sound? And then we won't.
That sounds great. We love controversy.
No cross-examination. So, well, I think I'd like to take a little bit of a forward-looking glance with my answer and talk about the CISO role as it's evolving and what an organization can do to continue to define their CISO role and maybe help people understand the difference between these two things. I'd like to see a future where the CISO cohort in general, everybody out there that's holding that title right now, is maybe right now we're at like 80% technicians, right? And there's 20% of people that have wafted over from whatever business element and thought, hey, this is where I need to be. And some of them have found success, some of them haven't. But whether we do it consciously or whether it's going to happen organically, I think in the next few years, you're going to see that technician percentage trend down. And you're going to see that business leader percentage trend up. And so as that happens, where you get more people that didn't grow up in deep tech experience in those leadership roles, they're still going to want somebody who has that level of knowledge and enter the architect. That's an opportunity for your organization to, whether you have an architect or not, put somebody in that technical role that says, hey, here's a clear line. The CISO is in charge of, business needs and administrative functions, and you're in charge of the engineering aspect of this. You both have, the CISO has the authority, but you have the operational demand to go out and do this work. And that way you can create that balance within your organization. Now, of course, as we said, that's dependent on how big your org is, what type of budget you have to fund another kind of senior level role. If you don't have that money and you can't hire a deputy CISO, maybe you can swing your leadership into hiring a senior architect and you just treat them like a deputy CISO, right? That has that technical wherewithal to get you through your job. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're going to see more increase in the overall senior leadership in a lot of organizations. And I think that's a good fit for a senior architect to support a business-focused CISO that doesn't have that technical background.
Yeah, good insights, Dick. And we'll flow back through in reverse order. So this next question, Jim will get the last word. So, staying with you, Dick, for a moment, do you think that this is going to shift at all? Like I was in leadership roles and in the military long before I went to security, and in fact, I kind of took a different path. I went from being a leader to an analyst and kind of worked my way back up slowly. But when we think through this, I definitely would always say I have an empowerment, trust others type mindset. A lot of what many of you said. But do you think this changes at all as the accountability of CISOs increases, we obviously see, the whole SolarWinds, Tim Brown fiasco, and SEC and other government entities lauding different levels of accountability. I think we'll see the day where we see CISOs in handcuffs. And if they were not in a situation where they understood the technical details of they were reporting, they might have really believed they were good when they weren't, right? So do you think the new levels of accountability will drive CISOs to become more technical? What do you think, Dick? Give you first crack.
Well, that was in my first CISO role. That was probably the first thing that I wouldn't say I struggled to figure out, but I needed to make sure my management had established, which was, what are you grading me on, right? What are you expecting me to deliver? I know what computer security looks like, but what are your touch points? What are we going to sit down and talk about once a quarter or once every 6 months? And how are you measuring the performance here? So I think that drives, the SEC new rules and the fiduciary responsibilities, the board visibility that's coming into the CISO's life. It does draw them into, hey, I need to understand how I'm being measured. If those measurements are technical or if those measurements are business, would drive the answer to your question. If the board or the senior leadership within the company that's not in the IT department understands technical measurements, then they may ask the CISO for reports on, hey, how many events of a certain type did we have last quarter? We want you to decrease that because we see that as a risk. I don't see boards and senior leadership getting to that level of technical expertise anytime soon. Don't get me wrong. CISOs are still responsible for making those decisions, but that outside influence absolutely drives the CISO to clarify, what am I being measured on? And now it's kind of unfortunate, and it shouldn't be our responsibility, but it is our responsibility then to match up. What does the SEC expect me to do? What does this other government body expect me to do? What does my board expect me to do? And what does operations expect me to do? You have multiple demand signals that all have different levels of teeth and different levels of consequences. So I think the real answer here is this all drives every CISO to clarify, what are you being measured on? So that when you do get into that situation where they say, this was your job, I'm not saying you have to always be in a defend yourself or CYA mode, but if it's clear what you're being measured on, and if that's technical, then yes, you better get smart on it. And don't assume that somebody else can answer those questions for you. You need to take that responsibility and learn the technology.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, Dick. I think role definition's really key in this. And, so Khellan, moving the question over to you, but adding a layer that I think Dick added for us of, is it going to change the role, the increased accountability? Is it going to change the CISO role towards or away from a more architecture direction? And then I'll add one more layer as you take the question on, Khellan, which is, if you define what the role is internally, how does that map to what courts, judges, government entities outside of you decide while judging you maybe retroactively? What do you think, Khellan?
Some great questions. I think it's going to be a long while before we see any sort of standard regulatory taking. I know that we've got nascent laws. I think New York has got one where every company must have a CISO and they're looking to have accountability. But I think it's going to be some time and quite a few years before we get maturation of the role enough to say that a CISO actually does have accountability and does have responsibility. And I think those two things are not necessarily the same thing for most CISOs. And again, it depends on the type of CISO that you are. Okay, if you're looked at as just a consultant or somebody to help advise the business, then how much authority do you have? And therefore, how much accountability do you have? So right now, we're going for still that maturation of what exactly is our role? I think I read somewhere there are 5 different types of CISO. Now, if we can't even identify what a CISO is underneath one acronym, how is anybody else going to try and work out what we should be held responsible for? I think if we are going to be looked at as true board members, then at the same time, we're going to need to have the same sort of board member training, which will probably include public speaking, which will probably include indemnity, golden parachute, all these sorts of things, which are also necessary rather than just the scapegoat fire him tomorrow, which is what we see or what we have seen way too often.
Yeah, those are really good points, Khellan. And I mean, it's interesting. This goes back to something Steve said a few minutes ago, which is, I think wherever you come from, you're going to have to learn something. For those of us that came into CISO roles from being technical, we had to learn a whole lot about everything from budgets to managing people to reporting to the board. But then similarly, if you're that CISO who comes over from a non-technical or non-security role, that there's maybe the inverse learning curve. You're already good at talking to the board, but now maybe you have to get a lot to get up to speed on technically. I mean, I guess we all have something to get up to speed on. All right, what do you think, Steve? Let's give you a crack at this one.
So I think, we have the couple of different types of CISOs that, they came up through the architecture world or they came over from the business side. But the two CISOs that I can think of that actually were indicted, they were both for doing things they shouldn't have been doing, right? So it wasn't that they've done everything right and everything was good to go, and then they got hacked, and now we need a throat to choke, and so we're going to get him. But where I do see CISOs now is in addition to the architecture they need to learn and the business acumen they need to learn, you're going to see CISOs becoming more legal scholars. So they're going to be watching what's happening here with these two cases. They're going to be looking at what their company is doing, and they're going to start weighing all of their decisions and how they respond to the board and to their bosses in more of a legal manner. I've had to do this in the past too, where they were going live with a project. They didn't fulfill all the security requirements. I refused to sign off on the project, and it was supposed to go live in 2 days. And this is something that this particular project manager used to do, is drop a go live date in 2 days on us. And if we failed them on the security side, she would go try to get approval elsewhere. So I ended up, my CIO was demanding me to sign this. I refused to. I made him give me a get out of jail free letter, and he signed the approval. And roughly 10 months later, we were hacked in the way that I told them we would be hacked if that didn't happen. And, they were coming after me because it was a security thing. And I thought, nope, I've got my get out of jail free card. This, you remember all of this. And my boss actually flew in to Scottsdale because of that very thing. And he's like, no, you're not pinning this on him because he told you up front it was going to happen. So you're going to find more CISOs more in a, cover your ass mode than being more approachable. I want to say, not approachable is not a good word, but being more the yes man. They're not going to be doing that anymore. They're going to be telling the board and telling their bosses, this is unacceptable and here's why. And if you want to do this, you're going to do this, but without me. And so that's kind of where I see the CISOs are going to really be looking at the legal aspect of how their decisions are going to be taken or could be taken down the road than they have in the past.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Steve. And Dick just put it in the chat in terms of like risk acceptance form. Right? I mean, it's gonna be key.
Well, you get in a lot of trouble though if you're not going to sign that risk acceptance form. The CIO for me, I mean, he was coming down hard on me to sign that, and I just refused to sign it. I was like, there's just no way I can sign this in good clear judgment. And so he ended up signing it because he made a promise that this particular project was going to go live to the corporate headquarters, and so it had to go live, and so he signed it, and that was my get out of jail free card, Road.
Yeah, and one thing I wonder about that though, Steve, and this will Jim, you can pick up the thread, and I'll add even one more element to it for you is so great. One of the things that SolarWinds, obviously, that the SEC has called out with SolarWinds is the fact that there were all these internal documents and things and communications, but then there's a statement on the website that says, hey, there's some diffuse verbiage that there could always be something wrong, but we have good security. So the challenge is, if we as the CISO have all these risk acceptances and things, and we tell people, hey, this is bad, you shouldn't do it, and they're like, okay, we're doing it anyway, it's not on you, is that literally going to be the noose that's slipped around our neck as the CISO when we also have on the website that says, hey, we have pretty good security. And then, you know, we do our hack vacs and our various different, you know, our SOC 2s. And if one iota of that doesn't line up, you know, is that going to bite us? And Steve, I'll give you a chance to comment further, and we'll punt it over to Jim.
Yeah, I think they're like I said before, they're gonna have to keep track of it. With that particular instance, I mean, the CISO, if he had stated that they weren't prepared to the internal team, but I don't know if he ever did that to the legal team. And again, I think and since there hadn't really been any indictments from any of the other vendors, I mean, good Lord, they don't indict Microsoft for these system level vulnerabilities that they have, right? So who would think that they're going to go after, you know, a CISO like that? But now we know they are. And so people are just going to have to become more knowledgeable on what their decisions can be. You know, there's consequences if you make a statement and you know that it's not true, or you allow somebody to make a statement on your behalf and you know it's not true. You got to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, it's good. Definitely good point, Steve. What do you think, Jim? You know, passing you a big basket of stuff now going last.
Which is, there's been phenomenal commentary so far just on this thread alone. Just to add a couple of things there, I think I agree that I don't know so much about the legality of the SolarWinds case. I know more about the Uber case with Joe Sullivan, and obviously there was areas there that certainly were not as cut and dry as had been, you know, stated in the vernacular in general. And there could have been an argument either way. I just think overall, we talked about the risk acceptance form. Pardon my French, but we got to stop half-assing this stuff, and we got to formalize these things. We did risk acceptance. It was mostly off the cuff, or just a little form that we just used to CYA internally. These things have to be more strictly legal formatted because of all these things that we're talking about. I think it's high time, because if you think about it, it's not such a huge stretch. I mean, there's a big bunch of hoopla, you know, otherwise in here, even within some of the peer groups that I'm involved with, saying, oh, now the CISO is going to be the scapegoat, blah, blah, blah. Well, I wonder if this was the same argument 20 years ago when Sarbanes-Oxley came around. They forced CFOs to sign along with CEOs to validate the veracity of the financial statements, rather than being able to just say, you know, the auditors checked it and whatever, right? You know, vis-a-vis WorldCom and some of these other things where you could claim a feign ignorance, whichever one. So, I mean, it's just the same type of formalization. Do I like it personally? No, of course not. But, you know, at some point, we have to get a lot more diligent and have more rigor and discipline anyway. That it's high time that we do this, because the nature of these, you know, events that we're all experiencing, they just keep getting worse and worse and worse, which is kind of counterintuitive, seeing all the different control, the supposedly more advanced technical and otherwise, those types of controls coming to market, usurping, you know, what's in the market in terms of complexity and ease of use or whatever. I would say paradoxically they should be going down, but they're not. They seem to be going up. So
I think some of that may be because you know, when you're talking about a risk acceptance program, usually that risk acceptance comes with exceptions, and we end up managing more exceptions than we do risk. And that's not acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, oh, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and while Dick was talking, I was making a few notes in terms of communicating to the board. And to be honest with you, I've reported to boards, I've been on boards, I've been a chairman of the board, and you have but maybe 3 or 4 minutes to get your security posture out there. I don't care how technical your board is or otherwise. So you really have to boil it down to the lingua franca that everybody understands, which is risk, and try to dollarize it as much as you can to go in line with other areas of enterprise risk. That's the only way you're going to get, you know, any kind of reaction or standing from a board level. They just don't have the time to get to the scales otherwise. They don't care about, how your phishing results increased 50, 60%. They're not going to be able to frame it in such a way that it's going to be positive.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's limits on what the board will like. I know I've got to be quick, I've got to be brief, and I've got to be high level in front of the board. And we have a phenomenal board, like they're above average. So I just wonder, like, sometimes if you're in a non-technical industry and you have a non-technical board, and as the CISO, you don't get to choose the board. You have to work with the board you have. So Jim, we'll lightning round. We've got maybe like 1-2 more minutes, but Jim, going back through, let's just kind of like, we've circled around the topic now, going back to the bullseye. Like, what do you think in the future role of the CISO? If we've got, more architecture context on one side, less on the other, which direction do you think we're headed, Jim, for the CISO?
For the CISO, I think it's equal parts of technical bucket, like I said at the outset, with some architecture, some understanding of the greater ecosystem, the ability to find the resources that you need, both human and otherwise, to be able to vet out, to affirm what from a technically strategic journey, which way you're going to take your organization. And then also the fiduciary, legal, and all these other things, which at a modicum, any C-level chair is expected to know anyway.
Yeah. Oh, excellent, Jim. Thank you so much. Steve, what do you think? If you bottom line your thoughts on this, go for it.
I'll make it short. I agree with Jim 100%.
Yeah. It's you laid it out well, Jim. I couldn't find much to disagree with there either.
Yeah, there's nothing to disagree
with. But maybe Khellan we'll give Khellan a crack at this. Bottom lining your thoughts on the role of architect and CISO in the future. What do you think, Khellan?
Good luck with trying to find a different answer. I think my learning colleagues have got it exactly right.
Sorry to usurp you, Khellan.
No, that's beautiful, Jim. You just made it a tough act for all of us to follow. And Dick, we'll give you the last word on this one. What do you think?
Well, I think that if the trend I suggested earlier, that we continue to have more business focused leaders move into the CISO role, I think we will see somewhat of a progression where architecture skills are decoupled from the CISO role as the CISO is expected to take on other things. So I think there will be a trend down to some degree in architecture skills within the body of the CISO cohort.
Yeah, you could be right about that, Dick. That does worry me though. Like, I love your comment on decoupling, because one thing we've got to remember is if we decouple the technical and the architecture, like say we decouple that means if I go to a happy hour with a vendor, I can have no opinion. Like basically they're like, oh, well, what are you doing for the future of some? I don't know. Talk to our architect. What are you doing for the future of your EDR? No, I don't know. Talk to the architect. Well, why am I even having drinks with you? Well, you shouldn't. You should have drinks with the architect. I'm not the technical decision maker anymore. So if we give up that technical as the CISO, we have to remember, and Steve, you led with this in the beginning, that means we give up those decisions too, and those decisions are now our teams. Any
still on the budget though, so you still
on the budget, yeah. Still sign the checks, yeah.
Yeah, you still have to run your due diligence on any product that's run, through a proof of concept or whatever.
Yeah, we'll definitely, Jim, Steve, Khellan, Dick, phenomenal thoughts and insights. It's been a privilege to get to have this conversation with you. Thank you all so much, and I'll hand it back over to Khellan.
Thanks, Mike.
Good job moderating, Mike.
Thanks very much, and thanks, Mike, for being such a great moderator. That's right. Thanks, Khellan, Steve, Dick, and Jim. And let's give you a big virtual round of applause, and I'll put you back in the audience.
Thank you.